Alrighty, guys. Today we're going to be going over the DPS listing for ICC going into Wrath of the Lich King. I'm the raid lead for Vile Intent. My name's Mixa, and today we're going to be going over what is S tier playable and what a realistic comp looks like with my guild. We're not going to be. We'll factor in the hardcore aspect where people are going to be transferring in 12 Unholy DKs, 9 Affliction Locks. But then we're actually going to talk the realistic, what a normal guild who isn't going to be going in and speed running this is going to look like. Alright. So, what do you guys think about Arms Warrior?
No.
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 Agree.
Please, no. Why did you even say that?
Why are you bringing an Arms Warrior to anything anymore?
Yeah.
Did we start the video?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so if we started the video, if we're gonna talk about Arms Warrior, then no.
No.
What's our
It's a PvP class. It's like saying you want a Frost Mage? No.
what's our premise? Like, what's the
What
We already have.
DPS listing going into ICC, what is actually realistically playable, not for a hardcore guild that's going to be speedrunning.
You take your Fury over in Arms for sure.
So
Arms
Arms is
doesn't bring anything to the table
Unplayable.
that every other class that's already better in a different spec already brings, including Mortal Strike.
so then
So
we
there's
see
no reason
Arms
to
as
have one.
unplayable, realistically.
Yeah. You could put
So then
Frost
would
Mage
you
with
put-
Witch as unplayable.
would you put Shadow Priest in that unplayable range also?
No.
Because
Definitely
Arms
why.
Arms
Shadow
DPS is the same as the Shadow Priest. The only difference is
No,
Vampiric
it's not.
Touch.
No, it's not.
Shadow Priest.
Actual
like
damage?
probably
There's no
Shadow
way.
Priest is like on the lowest end of
And
like.
usually soak things, so they're actually useful. So Shadow
Right.
Priest usually have a really big spot. Like Algalon, Shadow Priest was huge.
But
I
also,
agree with
also
that.
think about
in
it
terms
like
of pure
this.
DPS, that they are on the lower end of the totem pole of
Yeah,
like
but
all
not
of,
as
like,
low as
actual-
Arms.
No, I agree.
I'm-
I agree with that. I just mean like
s-
legit DPS.
I would say
Sub-Rogue,
Sub-Rogue
Shadow
even lower
Priest.
than...
Sub Rogue, Shadow Priest, and Arm Warriors are all about the same for the DPS as on what
So-
logs are showing right now.
So I would agree on
That's why I
that.
brought it
Shadow
up.
Priest brings the most out of all of those, though.
Right.
Did you
Sub-Rogue
just say
utility.
Sub-Rogue? Bro, Sub-Rogue damage is so fucking hot garbage. Like,
I mean,
there's
yeah,
no
because
way.
it's a PvP spec, yeah.
Yeah,
Sub-Rogue
exactly.
damage in TOGC is higher than Shadow Priest and Arms Warrior and
Alright.
Blood DKs.
So what are we thinking about Assassination Rogue? C tier and just bring Marksman?
I'd put it
or-
B tier. I'd put it B or A tier. It's still a decent fucking amount of damage.
Yeah.
But
I'd
what-
say B tier.
But what do they
B.
bring to the raid as well? If you are able to actually be a flexible rogue.
What do they bring? They
Damage.
bring crit, right?
Yep.
They bring a crit buff.
Mm-hmm.
So they bring
Yeah,
a crit
but-
buff,
Who else does?
which is okay in say a 10-man when you don't have other players that bring that crit buff. Say like a rep paladin brings same crit buff. I think there's another person that brings that 3% crit as well. But overall, their DPS is still pretty good. They're lower than they would have been in other patches because combat is just gonna completely blow it out of the water.
So,
It's not gonna be bad, just not gonna be the best for Rogue.
agreed.
So is the armor pen in T or ICC going to make combat pull more ahead of Assassination Rogues? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah,
The biggest
for sure.
thing with all these previous patches is that there hasn't been enough armor pen to sustain armor pen classes. So you needed a trinket such like Runestone that would proc an extra 700 armor pen. This patch there is no such trinket like that, and no one's going to be using such trinket in their this rotation because there's so much armor pen that you reach that amount that you had had with those trinkets at all times. That's not having a proc. Full-time armor pen, which makes them really, really strong.
Alright, so now we'll move into Boomy. Where do we see Boomy for DPS and the raid utility that they're going to bring for 10 and 25?
Very good in both.
Honestly, yeah,
They
I'd
bring
say
the
solid.
most.
I mean,
They bring the most when it comes to caster buffs, and on top of that, they have really solid AoE.
Alright, we're
For
going.
trash fights, yeah. They're gonna make trash really easy.
First-
Knockback for fucking Sour Fang. Hey, it was a YouTube video. Am I allowed to cuss?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alright,
Knockback for fucking Sour Fang.
For raw DPS, as of right now, they're about middle of the pack.
Ew.
So
they're middle of the
a-
pack on single target, but trash-wise,
Yeah.
bro, boomies are gonna be fucking slamming up there with locks.
Wow.
Sure.
And there's a lot of trash in this raid.
bottom of A minus or bottom of A plus or mid
I'd say
A
A
tier.
tier.
Yeah, they do bring a lot of utility too.
I'd say A plus. Very good.
A plus. Bottom
I
of
don't know
A
about
plus.
A plus.
I'd say it's an A plus.
Mm,
They're not a class you're gonna want to stack, so I would not probably put it up into S or A plus, but they're definitely a class that you're gonna
I'd
want
put
to
it
have
in-
in a raid.
yeah, put it in A.
All right. I would agree, especially with the innervate, the battle res, fairy fire, hit. I mean, everything you're gonna get from a boomy for 10
Yeah.
and 25.
While we're doing this, let's just knock out the ones that we don't want. Like BM, don't play it. The fights are far
Yeah.
too long. You don't ever want to bring
You
a
don't want a
BM hunter to
BM.
fucking anything.
Yeah, it's a leveling spec. Yeah.
Sub
Sub
rogue,
rogue.
you're not gonna want to bring anything.
Blood
Is that
DKs.
sub?
That's
all right, so-
bad.
That's a controversial one. All right. I'd say Blood DK DPS going in is like C.
Below arms warriors.
Well, are we doing a going in rank, or like going
Yeah,
in, or
Yeah, going in and the first couple weeks.
okay.
Going in, I'd say they're still above Arms Warriors, because
But-
I mean, yeah,
even if they're doing as much
Hasn't
damage
changed.
as an Arms Warrior, they also can still give their Unholy Frenzy to someone else that's doing better. So they're still providing a better buff, because you can stack those Unholy Frenzies, putting them on multiple players.
Also, think about it
yeah.
like this. Most guilds might not have a Blood DK as their tank. They might be rocking 2 prot pals, a bear, a warrior. So that does make Blood DPS viable for the buffs that they can bring.
If you're bringing
Not
a
at the same
melee
time,
for the
because
buffs,
you could get an Enhanced Shaman.
yeah, you're gonna bring an enhancement shaman instead of a blood DK.
That brings the same buff.
Yeah, so I'd put them in like C maybe.
I
Starting,
think they're
definitely
viable. I
they're
definitely
gonna
don't
go
think
up.
that you're gonna want to like.
If you
Look to bring
manage
one.
to actually get full bis on a Blood DK, though, they do some of the highest damage in the game so far.
Yeah,
from
in
stems.
game. Yeah, in
But
game they could
if-
go up there.
If our argument for making an arms warrior unplayable, if you've got blood DK, frost and unholy both are just a league's better. So if the argument to not bring every argument to not bring an arms warrior, the same arguments not to bring a blood DK.
The Blood DK could still provide slightly more. I'd say
It's
Exactly
right there
above.
on the cusp, I'd say, of unplayable to C.
It really is. Yeah,
It's definitely not recommended, but
not recommended for
Yeah.
sure.
you're probably not going to
I
be
mean, it's.
skipping
I
your
put it
raid.
on the same level as bringing an arcane mage over a fire mage. Like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
like if you're gonna play arms, just go fury and do more damage. Bring more.
So do you want to go ahead and put arcane mage in the same place as a blood DK?
I'd probably say
I'd probably-
so, yeah.
Yeah, I'd probably put arcane mage in C.
Because on
Not
those
bad,
short
but-
fights, they're going to blast.
The,
I don't know if they're gonna fucking blast that hard with how long the fights are, dude. They're gonna be mana
Right.
starved like a mug.
Yeah.
On those long fights, it's going to be rough. But like the Boomy and Trash, they have insane AoE damage for Trash.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
not as much as Fire's still gonna have with spamming Flame Strike.
True.
the rapier icon is for combat. The
That's for
stealth
combat?
icon
Yeah.
is for
Yeah.
sub.
All right. Well, we'll move combat back down here. We'll wait to talk.
Yeah, that's sub. There you go.
All right. We can all agree Frost Mage is just unplayable, correct?
Pretty much.
Just
Brings
no reason to bring
absolutely
one.
nothing. Doesn't do any damage compared to the other 2 specs.
Would marksmanship be there as well?
What?
Actually,
Marksman Hunters?
MM is
Marksman Hunters actually start
pretty
to pull really
solid.
good damage.
I think
I'd-
survival is still just
Its
beating it though.
survival is probably still
Or
gonna do
Survival's
more.
still gonna do way more, but
I'd,
Yeah.
I'd put marksman in B, honestly.
I'd say right here
Yeah.
next to Assassination
you-
Rogue.
Yeah, still
if you really
good,
want to
but not
play
as
one
good
and
as
you
the
got
other
a good,
spec.
if you got a good marksman player, then go ahead. But
Yeah.
But
Survival is just gonna surpass it every time.
I'm gonna bring out Arms Warrior again because Marksman DPS is below Arms DPS, and they bring what utility do they bring?
They bring the attack power buff if you don't already have it as well. They also bring a armor reduction buff.
The attack power buff that Enhancement Shamans will bring.
Pretty
They bring better mark. If your hunter's spec'd into better mark, it's gonna boost the damage of survival hunters.
Yeah.
Healing reduction.
Yeah, aim shot if you want. Yeah,
All in one. I think Marksman is just a better arms warrior because it just has more to it.
Yeah, so then
And
I would argue
you have
C tier
traps.
instead of B tier.
So in total, they bring 10% attack power, 5% armor reduction, and 3% physical hit reduction. That's what our marksman brings in total.
So I'd say very B minus into C until they start getting all their armor pen gear as well.
Yeah, because DPS will change as they get gear.
Yeah, because they don't bring any unique buffs. There's a better class to bring all the buffs that a marksmanship hunter would bring.
For sure.
Yeah.
But in the same sense, for a non-realistic hardcore raiding guild, if you had an MM hunter, it's not a bad move to bring an MM hunter. But if they have survival, see if they can go survival.
You know, I'd say
100%.
Arcane is probably in the same position with that then. I'd probably put Arcane a tier up. Because you can have an Arcane Mage. Arcane Mage does a lot of damage.
That's probably right.
But, I mean, Fire will just probably be better.
Demo.
It's not like Fire Mage brings anything that big anyway in itself. Like, Mage only brings one buff in general.
Right.
Demo I'd put above Boomy.
Still A tier though.
Yeah. I'd almost put that low A+, honestly. That spell power buff is just so fat.
The spell power buff and the ability to have the shadow tank on Blood Council.
100%.
They do bring more utility for overall raid than I'd say almost any class besides the Boomy, but then they can also go into the tank spec as well. So I'd say bottom of A minus personally.
Yeah. You could go ahead and just throw Affliction in S tier. If you got a good Affliction, that's just solid fucking damage.
For sure.
All around.
Now, what I do want to talk about this is a lot of other people are saying if you have two Boomies, then just make them swap to an Affliction Lock, right? And that's where the realistic rating portion comes in, is you're not going to have 12 characters or 12 people who have 12 Aff Locks to fill in for, say they have an Arcane Mage, but they want an Aff Lock instead. Yes, Aff Lock is S tier, but Aff Lock is only S tier if you actually know how to play Aff Lock, because it's probably one of the hardest rotations, and the ability to have gear on an Affliction Lock, because you're not going to bring a 5k Aff Lock over a 5300 Arcane Mage if that's what you have.
Yeah.
Now, Frost DK.
Frost DK I'd put an A+. Because don't they actually, they're like right up there with Unholy now, right?
They already do really good damage. They're going to start doing even more though.
Yeah, with more armor pen. Maybe even
if
we're gonna put Unholy in S tier, since I already know that's pretty much a thing. Then I'd probably put Frost underneath Unholy.
Above Demo, right?
No, Frost in like S tier with them, but like so it would go S tier, Affliction, Unholy, and then Frost.
This is beginning though. I'd still put them in like an A because they're not gonna be quite up there.
Yeah, Frost DKs are again slightly above middle of the pack on DPS, and the only raid buff they bring is
improved Rusty Talons.
Yeah,
they're middle of the pack is what I'm saying as well. Yeah,
they're really going to be the only one that brings that, because most enhancement shamans don't spec into the improved Wind Fury, just because it's baseline that your Frost DK will always have it.
So and it's actually an overall DPS loss for enhanced to spec into that.
So
I'd probably say a solid A overall.
since we're talking about Frost DKs, on fights, what else do Frost DKs bring, if anything, with their raid utility of Shackle, Death Grip, or anything like that? Because on a noob, you obviously needed a DK to pull down the ice. Are there any mechanics that you guys can think that you would want more than one Frost DK inside your raid week 1?
No.
No, I'd say
More than one, probably
no,
not. But I
more
think
than
they're gonna
one.
chunk on Sourfang with the ads. A Howling Blast, real quick.
Unholy
AoEs
running
reduced.
diseases, yeah. Unholy
100%
running
unholy
diseases
though,
and their
yeah.
death and decay would be better.
I mean, yeah, it's gonna be better, right? But it's still not gonna be bad.
Yeah,
But-
it's definitely not going to hurt your raid to have more Frost DKs, but it's not going to be a class I think people are going to go out of their way to stack.
Yeah, no.
What's better, Dizzy? Frost Unholy or Frost Blood?
In ICC,
Frost.
it's going to be Frost Blood.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah, there's too much target swapping for Frost Unholy to be really good. You lose a lot of the benefits from Unholy when you target, or from the sub Unholy when you swap targets a lot, or when you have any downtime in a fight.
Gotcha.
Alright, so I'd put them under Boomy, right there with Assassination, honestly. Personally.
Probably.
Honestly, I
that's
still think they're going to be really solid.
They will be.
By the
but-
end, probably, yeah.
But at the start, it's not bad to have one, but this is where it comes into if you have a DK, if they have an Unholy spec that's pretty solid, you're gonna just stack Unholy DKs, right?
Yep. Well, it's like Cliff was saying about the armor pen. Once they get a lot more armor pen, they're going to start creeping up. But that's more towards after you're clearing ICC for a couple of weeks.
Right.
You could slam. You could just put Unholy up there in the S tier. It's just good damage.
But we all know.
Possibly
right?
even good survivability if you end up having one that goes into the zone.
That's another thing is Unholy DKs can spec into AMZ for magic fights. They do bring almost the best AoE and the best single target of everybody, which is why everybody's going to be stacking them. However, taking out whatever you guys have for your raid and making them attempt to play an Unholy DK that they might only have 4.9 5k gear score and don't know the actual rotation, it's going to hinder you regardless. Them being S tier does not make them the best class without knowing their rotation.
A bad Unholy is bad.
Right, a bad Unholy goes down into C tier.
And because a lot of the fights in ICC are longer, if you're not stacking Unholy DKs and Aff Locks, Unholy is going to not pull as far ahead the longer a fight goes.
I don't know about that because what's the cooldown on Gargoyle?
2 minutes?
2 minutes? Yeah, they're gonna have some like 2 or 3 on some of the fights snapshots for Gargoyle. I think they're still gonna be solid damage no matter what.
Oh, for sure, they're still going to be solid, but more so than most other classes, they are managed by fight time because they're not going to be able to line up all their cooldowns the way that they do an opening Gargoyle. So the Gargoyles are going to get less effective as the fight goes and cooldowns don't line up.
I would definitely agree on that. So let's go into Elisham.
I'm gonna shut up.
Well, actually, you're the Elisham expert here, right? You ran probably 50, 60 hours on PTR, so you've seen how Elisham performs over opening classes on others. Personal thoughts.
Yeah, I'm going to have to say unplayable.
Guess I'm getting benched, huh? Finally. I mean, I don't know, dude. I think Elisham was madly
Underestimated, honestly.
yeah,
From what I see,
underestimated through the whole fate, the whole X-Pack.
I would put it in A+ for the damage that they're actually bringing and the utility that they bring with totems on some fights, especially having shamans on not Lady Death Whisper, Blood Queen. It's pretty nice if you can line that up with your Tremor Totem as well.
Mm-hmm.
and the AoE potential on Sourfang, because your Chain Lightning does bounce with a full hit on each one.
Dude, I was hitting everything with Chain Lightning, all of
And
them at
bouncing
the
on
same
Death
time.
Whisper.
It bounces like that. The biggest thing with Ellie is going to be mana management on the longer fights for groups that are going to have longer fights. But again, I just think Ellie was so underestimated the whole X pack, and I mean I've been beating Aff Locks and Unholy DKs the whole time, man, as Ellie Sham. So really, I'm one-sided on it. If anything, we bring good utility, bring a knockback, off-spec heal, can spam. I mean, you guys saw it in TOGC, bro. Me and Clyce healing that 10-man that almost wiped.
Yeah, their DPS is definitely A tier, but I like what I'm saying about a lot of the utility and uniqueness that they bring to a raid and their flexibility. Like, you're not going to be hurting your raid bringing multiple Ellie Shamans.
On cleave fights, they're strong. We're already spamming Chain Lightning for single target damage anyways.
Now,
Now,
perhaps
oh, go ahead, Dizzy.
I say perhaps as armor pen gets more plentiful, we'll see some of these other armor pen classes pulling ahead. But that doesn't take anything away from the utility that Totem is talking about.
Now, I could see that. However, if they get DFO or the Cinder Ghost to Trinket, it's like a 600 DPS increase for almost every caster. But remember, Ellie Shams also have the potential to go Resto for your Volithria fights. And if you have a good shaman who just goes straight spell power gems, they're actually going to be slamming some fat heals into Volithria.
Yeah, it's actually going to be, I think in general, having any class that can go into an off-spec healer and go, because for the Volithria fight, you don't worry about mana, nothing like that. You're just pumping fat heals. So having any off-spec class that can go into a healer position and somewhat know what they're doing and just stack spell power as far as you can go, spell power trinkets, all of it, is going to be huge for Volithria.
So personally, I'd put them above Demo Lock, because you can stack Ellie Shams if you do need caster DPS, and they are up there with the Fire Mages and close to the Aff Locks as well, as long as it's played correctly.
100%. I still would personally, being the Ellie Sham, I don't know if I'd put it over the Demo Lock. Honestly, they have better damage than Demo Lock, but that spell power buff that Demo Lock brings, it's almost necessary.
It is necessary, but they aren't stackable. If you stack Demo Locks, you
Yeah,
just get
true.
to a point where you're kind of fighting for the buff, right?
Yeah, there's no point in having more than one Demo Lock.
Yeah, and the Demo DPS isn't even all that. I'd almost put him in like an A. Like, yeah, you need the buff, but DPS isn't like stackable, like you said.
But
Yeah,
but
every
it's kind
other
of the same thing as
yeah.
Ellie Sham, right? Like Ellie Sham can go Resto on Volithria, as Demo Locks can go tank on Blood Council.
And I
yeah.
mean, just that buff in general, dude. I'd keep him in A+, not A. That buff in every other caster needs that buff.
Yeah.
If you
Might
don't
as well
have that buff, you're missing out on so much damage.
Might as well throw Fire Mage up in S.
Yeah, you definitely throw Fire Mage up in S tier.
That's the thing, right? Are you gonna want to be stacking 4 Fire Mages going into this fight with all of the movement that you actually have to do in ICC? Would Fire Mages be up in S tier, or do you think they're gonna go A+?
Yeah, because we're specking for the extra range. We get the extra 6 yards that we're specking into now. So I mean, I don't have to move as much as you really think I do.
Yeah, a good mage with blink and other abilities, they can position themselves to move a lot less than other casters.
And you have your refreshing of Living Bomb and your instant.
The longer we go into the phase, the more range they're going to figure out what we can cheese and what we can't.
Right.
And where we could squeeze in more. I mean,
And
if you're not looking at that kind of stuff, you're not a good range character. So
yeah, and Fire Mage is just the top range DPS.
Now, if we're talking utility for the guilds that are going to be attempting the 5 to 6 heroics right off rip, Rot Face, Fester Gut.
I think the only way you're getting that is if you're stacking Aff Locks and Unholy DKs first couple weeks.
For sure. But there is like potential to have, if you guys, all your guys' DPS is very high and everybody's playing to the top of their ability, I'd say those other two are on the table as long as things go well. But
Yeah.
do fire mages bring anything extra to the table besides some slam and DPS? So Afflocks are going to bring the 25% execution phase, which you could stack, and it's going to start to show very quickly on the execution.
Hey, I execute too. What the fuck?
I would say that on ad fights like Sarfang and Dreamwalker, you're going to want a Fire Mage more than you're going to want an Aff Lock, because a Fire Mage turning and spamming a few Scorches is going to put out a lot more DPS than an Aff Lock trying to stack all their dots away for them to tick.
Right.
So they provide a different DPS profile than an Aff Lock does that is good for all of those fights where you have to do target swapping and things have to die in like 3 seconds. Like an Aff Lock is not going to be able to do that, but a Fire Mage can.
Right.
I mean, potentially an Aff Lock can kind of, in a sense, do the same thing, right? As long as they were to keep their corruption on Sourfang going and then switch to one of the beasts, they could just fucking spam
Shadow Bolts.
speed and hit them.
Yeah, I
Well,
can polymorph.
The Seed's
Like
not
a
going to work on
CC.
Starfang because they take 90% reduced AoE
You're
damage.
right. I'm gonna shut up.
I mean, they could like drain life or something, but again, a few Scorches is going to do a lot more damage.
Yeah.
Now,
Or even with high haste, a Fireball.
Now, I also will give it to fire mages on some of those fights if you are going to attempt heroic. If you go into Festergut and the Plungent Blight goes out, you can ice block that without getting your stacks and actually live through that.
Yeah.
So they do bring personal utility to
Frost
Yeah,
Nova as
I can
well.
live through. Yeah, Frost Nova, I can poly as well.
right. So I'd
There's
put
no
it,
reason not to have them in S tier.
I can invis reset if we don't have a rogue or a hunter.
I would put them bottom of S tier, but I would put them S tier. As long as you have good fire mages, you can stack them if that's
As
what
long
your
as
guild
it's
has.
doing the DPS, yeah, it'll be S. Like you said, a bad class isn't gonna be, gonna be that tier if it's bad.
Right. All right. Now
And
what
a
about
bad player is going to be a bad player no matter where
Yeah,
they're
bad
at.
player, yeah.
what about enhancement shaman?
Unplayable.
No way. Get out of here, Toto.
Personally,
I hate Enhance.
I'd put them above Boomy because the casters are going to have a little bit extra range to kind of play with, right? Whereas melee do have to kind of play it perfect to make sure that they aren't taking excess damage. So I'd say it's right there between Boomy and Destro or Demo, but it's they still bring the exact same thing as an Elisham, but the range from an Elisham, they're just going to get a little bit more benefit from it.
So
Honestly, I'd probably put Enhance below Demo. Enhance is still going to be some gnarly DPS.
Yeah, I would.
So I'd say
And
bottom
big
of A+.
AoE. Yeah, big AoE for trash packs.
Yeah, I guess it could be A+.
Hexes, slow totems, all of that. I think they're going to be,
For
I think they're
me,
gonna be fine.
Enhance is kind of the biggest question mark coming into ICC because are they going to stay Spellhance or are they going to go a straight physical build? Like
I
that's
think some people were saying that they go straight physical, and then there's some people saying that you still play spell hands. I'm not sure.
I
don't like Enhance at all. Subpar spec.
I would say the biggest advantage that Enhance, well, and Ellie Shamans have over some of the others is they take very little ramp up time. I mean, that snapshot of Fire Ellie, but like you put an Enhancement Shaman on a target and they're hitting max DPS pretty quick.
Right.
That's true.
I'd still put them below Demo, but above Boomy. I'd say like right there in the center, on that line of A+ to A.
Yeah.
Now, this is a controversial one. I would give Feral Druid right above Boomy, their damage output is crazy, and what they bring is pretty nasty.
I would almost put them in A plus only because
Yeah,
they're
I'd
off
put 'em in A+.
tanking as well. You're gonna use a feral you can use a feral as your third tank for 4 out of whatever fights you need them, and then they can still DPS.
Right.
I'd
But
almost put them above Ellie, honestly, because their damage is strong.
Yeah.
Fucking the utility from the off specs. Fucking
Rebirth, yeah. I mean,
Straight damage
Cyclone
alone would put him in A
is
plus.
huge. Yeah, I would A plus a feral druid for sure.
would you guys stack a feral druid like you would stack any other class in this A plus tier besides the demo lock?
But I wouldn't
I
stack
think I'd
enhanced
stack a feral
either of them.
just as much as I'd stack an Ellie. Honestly.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
No,
Because-
You still don't really want. It's not going to be bad to stack Ellie, right?
right.
And it's not going to be bad to stack feral. It's definitely not the best thing that you're going to want to do, but
Yeah.
Now, for those
It's-
guilds that don't have all of the Unholy DKs, where they would only put one feral and the rest Unholy DKs, is it a viable aspect to have, say, 3 ferals versus pugging out 2 Unholy DKs?
Absolutely.
I think so. Yeah, that's 2 extra rebirths.
2 extra rebirths, 2 extra innervates, and your DPS is not too far behind that Unholy DK.
Right. Fury Warrior. Nope. Fury Warrior.
There is a lot of cleaving in ICC.
There is a lot of cleaving, but I feel like they're a hit or miss. It's a complete 180 fight to fight or even opener to opener.
It's super gear dependent, and yeah, a lot of the fights are gonna be different.
And after having looked at a lot of logs, I think Fury Warriors are the most susceptible to imperfect tanking and positioning. Granted, they have the charge, but because Warriors depend so much on that cleave and whirlwind damage, if the tanking is just a little off and the adds are just out of range, their TBS plummets a lot. So the hard part about Fury Warriors is things that are completely out of their control. I would say sometimes.
So would you put them where Frost is, or would you put them above Frost DPS?
Their DPS is better than Frost DK's.
What about utility for the raid? 'Cause you are getting shout, and you're also getting a sunder. And you know that the warrior is actually going to be sundering versus any rogue who's probably not going to be sundering.
Well, rogue should never sunder if a warrior's in group. Rogues are just so much better damage.
Now, would you stack multiple Fury Warriors if you had the potential not to?
No.
So with that, DPS, I would put them right there with Frost, but because their DPS is a little better, I'd kind of stack them right next to each other.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
I think that's pretty fair.
Ret Paladin, going into ICC.
I put it above Demo.
Yeah, I'd put him in A plus probably, because I mean the utility of a paladin, just period, no matter what spec, is just disgusting.
Right.
And rets are gonna be doing nasty damage with all the undead.
Yeah. And right now their DPS is slightly above average, but you just add in the undead, and that adds 25% DPS to anything a Ret Pally can do. So they're going to be up there in the top.
Yeah.
Now, I'd say after week 2, they probably go into S tier. But they're just as stackable as a cat, just as stackable as an Elisham. But they bring a little bit extra than a cat and an Elisham. So would you put them above?
Yeah.
Just riding the cusp of S until they get their 2 set of tier 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. Because they're going to do more DPS than anybody else in that tier except maybe a Feral Druid. And they're bringing much more utility.
Right. They also bring the replenishment as well to the raid. This is a controversial one. Shadow Priest.
Put him in the same spot as Boomy.
I wouldn't even put him that high. Like, I would put him with a Marksman Hunter or an Arcane Mage.
With their
I'd
DPS,
put him in the same spot as Boomy because they have AoE coming from fucking Mind Flay and all that. They still bring hit buff, priest buff, obviously. But I mean, you're probably gonna end up having a Holy Priest or a Disc Priest or both in most raids, anyways.
right. Now, going into specific fights of why you would bring a Shadow Priest. Lich King, soaking the ghosts. They can dispersion soak and keep the ghosts from coming in and exploding. They can dispersion almost anything, right? So even on Festergut, they can dispersion to make sure they aren't taking excess damage. If you're targeted by the slimes, you can use dispersion and it'll then pick a new target on Professor Putricide. So there is some utility that they bring to potentially increase the DPS of everybody else as well. Also, if you go into Blood Queen Lanethel, if they get bit, their raid healing goes crazy. So would they still be considered B tier next to Marksman and Arcane?
Cream, I got DC to get back on.
I would still argue yes, because they don't. The only unique thing about a Shadow Priest is kind of their group healing. I say unique with quotations because shamans can do the same thing with almost the same thing with their totems, and an Arcane Mage can ice block anything that a Shadow Priest can dispersion. So the only thing they have going for them is they could switch specs to Unholy or switch specs to Holy for like a Dreamwalker fight if you need it. So I mean that to me would put them low A, high B tier, but I still wouldn't want to bring them over a Boomy.
So I'd put them above Marksman and an Arcane, and they're not bad to bring for your raid. But if you have the potential to bring something other, you'd only probably bring one Shadow Priest, two Shadow Priests at the most. Because they are still viable.
For sure.
Alright. Survival Hunter.
I'd put, with the introduction of Trap Launcher, Survival Hunter is probably going to be, I'd put it right after Ret Paladin. Honestly.
I'd say with the utility that they bring, because you can also deterrence the shadows during Lich King. You're able to disengage on Lich King. Yep.
For the Valkyries.
You're able to bring a lot of utility to a lot of fights. Even with Sourfang, if they can get a Frost Trap down for ads, it does help out as well. Disengage back into position.
No other class is going to beat swap damage like a Hunter
right.
can.
So looking at what we've got now, their DPS is B tier. So is there enough raid utility to bump them up pretty much a tier and a half?
I'd say with a well-played Survival Hunter,
easily.
and on Marogar, their soaking potential to keep the flames out, you're always going to have a Hunter out there. I'd say they're the best person to actually do that because they can't go in and DPS on the stack. They also bring Misdirection, which obviously rogues bring tricks, but a Misdirection in a 10-man can fill that role of a rogue not having tricks. Especially
on... Misdirect is just bigger than a tricks, honestly, if you ask me.
And if you think about Lady Death Whisper, the threat drop-off, the Hunter's just going to keep giving the tanks as much threat as he has.
Yeah. And then, again, Sour Fang with the traps. A good hunter will get in there and place a slow trap.
Mm-hmm.
Potential for completely freezing a target with block ice trap, ranged one, because that we have trap launcher. They have trap launcher for that.
Right.
So their DPS is just going to be honestly bonkers with the introduction of the trap launcher. Once people get used to it, not missing a trap anymore isn't going to be a thing really.
And I will also give him this. The Feign Death reset on all the bosses is going to be pretty nice to get melee into position to start the boss off correctly.
Again, with cleave fights too. Although I don't know if I didn't try the hunter, but Chain Lightning, which is a 3-target hit, was hitting beasts for full amount, so I would think that multi-shot would do the same on hunter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely put him up there with Feral, but definitely not even touching where Rhett's going to be.
Yeah, no. Red just the Holy Wraths, all of that. Just so much utility with a paladin now, especially with everything being undead.
So their traps and misdirects and utilities are more than the demo buff?
Honestly, because they are stackable, I would say yes.
And damage.
They do more damage than Demo Locks. They have pets for Blood Council on the fusion orbs as well. So same thing that an Aff Lock and a Demo Lock can do for pets and the fusion orbs, Survival Hunter can do. Their deterrence and their potential to be a soaker definitely helps out a lot. So I'd say overall, yes, hunters bring more utility than, I'd say, everything but a paladin and a shaman, but they just pull a little bit more damage with trap launcher going into phase 4. Last one, combat rogue.
They don't really have much utility, but they're good damage, so I'd probably put them at bottom A+, right under Enhance.
So this is a stackable class as well. It's not anything hindrance to stack it, and I know a lot of people are saying if you have multiple rogues, make them play Unholy DKs, but it's not a viable strat for most guilds, right? So I would say that combat rogue, their damage that they do pull and what they are going to start to essentially get right off rip is going to be pretty nasty.
Yeah, they're already sitting top 4 or 5 for DPS, and there's no reason to think that will change anytime soon.
Now there is one class that was left out here, and it's Destro Lock. Where would you guys put a Destro Lock in this mix right here? If you have a lock who is thinking about playing Destro.
Bottom of A.
I'd say somewhere along the lines of that, or around where Assassination and stuff is. They do decent damage, but they're super useful when it comes to certain things.
Now, why would you take one Destro or an Aff Lock who can play Destro rather than just taking an Aff Lock? What is the utility that they bring?
Well,
Go ahead, Cliz.
They're a really good tank for the Blood Council, because they have the one item, or the one talent from their free, forget exactly what they're called, but when you take spell damage, you take reduced damage from that class for a certain amount of time. So that's always really nice.
And
on top of that, their stun is really nice as well for other fights.
They don't think of Shadow Fury, which is huge for Starfang.
It's huge for Valkyries, Sourfang, The ads on Lady Death Whisper as well.
That stun's just gonna be high value this tier. No matter
Now,
which way you really look at it.
would you ever think about taking more than one Destro Lock?
No.
That would, yeah, that would come down to just damage, right? And like situational.
Right.
If I didn't have another caster that I had to bring, and there was a 99 Parson Destro Lock looking me in the face asking to join my raid, I probably wouldn't be against it. I definitely probably wouldn't be looking for one if I already had one, let alone looking for one at all in general. Like, yeah, Shadow Fury is gonna be nice, but I think, you know, as
I
time
wasn't
goes
ready,
on,
Cream. I'm an idiot.
as time goes on, having the extra stuns and whatnot will probably be less valuable.
I
Oh
would
wait,
definitely
Cream's not
agree.
in here either.
But alrighty, boys. Thank you for the input. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you can send my royalties to my address.
Alrighty, guys. There you guys have it. This is a couple non-hardcore raiders just talking about where we see DPS and how normal guilds can actually fit things in. And I'd say this tier list plays a little bit more into the average player versus the hardcore raider that just sees 12 Unholy DKs, 19 Aff Locks, and 1 tank. But with that, hit that like button, hit the subscribe. Appreciate it, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.